In November 2025, the city of New York held its mayoral election. The three main candidates in the race were Curtis Sliwa, a popular radio talk show host who ran as the Republican candidate, Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York State who ran as an independent after losing the Democratic primary earlier that year, Zohran Mamdani, who ran as the Democratic candidate. Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic candidate, was born as the son of Indian parents in Uganda. Between the ages of 5 and 7, his family immigrated to the United States, settling in New York City. As a religious individual, Mamdani identifies as a Shia Muslim and was previously affiliated with the Working Families Party. The Working Families Party is a progressive political organization with ideological roots ranging from social democracy to democratic socialism. Mamdani, who has been closely associated with the party, also holds membership in the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, a broad coalition dedicated to democratic socialism which includes members across spectrum, some of whom hold Marxist views. Zohran Mamdani, a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, frequently becomes a target for criticism by both liberal and conservative factions, who often draw comparisons to historical figures like Stalin and Mao, which can be misleading. In reality, Mamdani's economic doctrine advocates not for the outright abolition of capitalism, but for its reformation and regulation. His policy positions fall somewhere between European-style social democracy and moderate forms of market socialism. Mamdani's approach centers on taxing the wealthy and large corporations to fund expansive social welfare programs, universal healthcare, affordable housing, free education, mirroring the models of Scandinavian social democracies. It's a clear departure from laissez-faire capitalism, yes, but it's also far from full Marxism. Here's an excerpt from the Al Jazeera article titled Fact Check: Is Zohran Mamdani a communist? Though after I quote this article, there are a few points I disagree with and would like to clarify. To quote, Mamdani's platform calls for the implementation of some city-owned grocery stores, additional affordability policies, and his commitment to democratic socialist principles. As a member of the New York State Assembly representing New York City, he identifies as a democratic socialist and has been endorsed by the New York City Democratic Socialists of America, DSA-NYC. DSA-NYC describes its goals as including the collective ownership of key economic drivers that significantly shape our lives, such as energy production and transport. It envisions a system where ordinary people have a genuine say in workplaces, neighborhoods, and society as a whole. Mamdani's platform includes freezing rent for tenants in buildings with pre-existing rent caps between lease renewals, protecting vulnerable renters from sudden price hikes. He has proposed establishing city-owned grocery stores to combat food insecurity and high prices, starting with one store in each borough, modeled after public markets like those in Kansas. He advocates for fully free bus transit and universal childcare to ease the burden on working families. To fund these programs, he supports raising the corporate tax rate and increasing the minimum wage, aiming to shift economic responsibility toward large businesses and wealthier residents. Mamdani does not advocate for eliminating private ownership. In fact, one of the goals listed on his official website is to make it faster, easier, and cheaper to start and run a business. A clear signal that he supports entrepreneurship and small business development. In an interview with the New York Times, Mamdani acknowledged the shift in his position on housing, stating, I clearly recognize now that there is a very important role to play the private market in housing construction. This evolution reflects a pragmatic approach. He continues to call for robust public investment in affordable housing through government-led projects, but does not propose abolishing or nationalizing the entire housing sector. The idea that Mamdani is a communist is an absurd slander, said Jeffrey Kurtz, Associate Professor of Political Science at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, City University of New York. When U.S. politicians describe themselves as democratic socialists, they typically refer to expanding social welfare, like universal childcare, healthcare, and education, funded through progressive taxation, much like systems in Nordic countries. According to Ted Henkin, a professor at Baruch College, Mamdani doesn't seek to abolish private property or push for government takeovers of industries. Instead, his proposals focus on targeted interventions such as city-owned grocery stores and rent freezes to address the high cost of living in New York City. The New Yorkers who support him seem to do so not because of any communist ideology on his or their part, but because he proposes to address crisis affordability, said Ted Henkin, Baruch College professor. His city-run grocery store idea doesn't aim to eliminate private chains, which already receive public subsidies, but to complement them with non-profit, municipally run alternatives, he explained. While Mamdani stated in a campaign TikTok that he would redirect funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, he never advocated abolishing corporate markets. Instead, his plan emphasizes collaboration, city-run store sourced from local small businesses and family farms, supporting community-based economies rather than replacing private enterprise. Political theory experts note that Mamdani's proposals, such as free or heavily subsidized childcare and public transit, echo policies already in place in various Western democracies like France and Canada. Oksana Chevel, an associate professor of comparative politics at Tufts University, points out that many of Mamdani's ideas have been successfully implemented in other democratic nations, indicating a commitment to evidence-based policy, not ideological extremism. Trump has alleged that Mamdani is a communist. However, Mamdani's proposals are rooted in enhancing affordability by implementing public services. This is distinct from communism, which emphasizes state ownership and centralized planning. Rather than advocating for the abolition of private property or the seizure of enterprises, Mamdani seeks to regulate corporate power and redistribute wealth for public good. I want to make something clear. The article correctly states that Zohran Mamdani is not a communist, and that's true. But it's also important to say, communism, as a theory and ideal, is not inherently evil. In fact, true communism, a classless, stateless, moneyless society based on common ownership and free association, has never actually been achieved in practice. What we've seen in history are attempts at traditional forms of the dictatorship of the proletariat, not full communism. Examples include the Paris Commune of 1871 and the early Soviet experiment between 1970 and 1921, when worker councils Soviets held real power before centralization under Stalin distorted the project. I use the term dictatorship of the proletariat instead of socialism or communism to describe the transitional stage between capitalism and socialism. This stage represents a period during which political power is held by the working class or the proletariat as it moves to dismantle the power of the capitalist class or the bourgeoisie. The ultimate goal of this transitional stage is to erase class domination, creating a classless society. Once the bourgeois class has ceased to exist, this period of transition would end, paving the way for a future stateless, classless, moneyless society, socialism. When the average person thinks about communism, they often picture leaders like Stalin or contemporary China, but it's a misconception. The Soviet Union under Stalin wasn't genuinely socialist, as the working class didn't truly control the state. The upper echelons of the Communist Party formed a new ruling class. While modern-day China's economy remains heavily market-oriented, relatively little worker control or democracy. These examples of so-called communism are not a faithful representation of the Marxist ideal. Instead, they reflect particular historical circumstances and interpretations rather than inherent flaws in communist theory. Contrary to popular belief, Karl Marx did not advocate for a one-party state or vanguard party rule. The regimes of Stalin and Mao differ significantly from Marxist principles and did not truly represent the working class. Rather than fearing Marxism itself, we should focus on the dangers of authoritarianism. The history of revolutionary movements getting corrupted serves as a warning against the concentration of power. This doesn't mean communism is inherently dangerous, but it underscores the need for vigilant safeguards against authoritarianism. Unfortunately, decades of anti-communist propaganda have caused many Americans to fear communism outright, whereas socialism appears more acceptable. As a Marxist, I am thrilled about Zohran Mamdani's election victory. Although Mamdani himself is not a Marxist, his policies have the potential to significantly improve the lives of New Yorkers during his term as mayor. This outcome ignites hope that the United States can move towards a brighter future, despite the challenges. However, I believe it's unlikely for America to elect a true socialist president. A social democratic leader may prevail, but a socialist will likely not. The key to fostering change lies in fostering class consciousness among the populace. That's it for today's video. Sorry I've been off the grid for about a month. Peace!